Welcome back to another blustery spring afternoon on the Breakout Barn. We are here with my dear new friend Willie, and Willie is doing us a solid by peeing all over my lift, probably celebrating April showers, spring May flowers, or some sort of nonsense like that. What are we gonna do today? Willie, why are you leaned up on three wheels with a jack still underneath you, and jack stands, don't worry, and your hood open? Well, we know that Willie's starter is taking a dump, for lack of a better term. What we're gonna do, in the interest of keeping this project as cheap and as simple and as being as resourceful as we possibly can, we're gonna pop the starter out, pull the case off the starter, because what do we have to lose? We're gonna try and clean that bish up, and we are going to throw it back in and see what happens. We're gonna bench test it first, just to make sure. What's up?
I didn't know you were filming.
Yeah.
Say hi. Say hi.
That's a baby. We'll be right back. So now we have a baby in the audience. We're gonna crawl underneath good old Willie and pop out the starter and see what we can do with it. How's that sound?
Say hi. Say hi to all the people.
First time in the barn.
Yep.
Cool beans. Okay, so I didn't bring it into the truck with me because who wants to watch me struggle with 3 bolts and a wire for 26 minutes? Ford did this awesome thing where the transmission is recessed enough that you can barely get a socket on. So you need to use a chrome socket and a couple of extensions and go up and over the exhaust, and then it's like 1/8 of a turn at a time, and it's horrible. Crappy design. Whereas they could have just gone through the engine side. Oh wait, yeah, no, they could have just gone through the engine side and it would have been so much easier, but they didn't. So anyways, this is a first for me. We have critter crap in the starter itself. Here is the turd of a starter soaked in oil. I wonder why it's not working, not wanting to work. Which leads me to believe that critters probably made their way into the bell housing, a little bit scared for what's in there. At this point, we're going to say YOLO and just send it and hope for the best. But if they got in, they probably got in through the shift fork boot that's on the actual side of the bell housing. Again, like I said, this thing sat for 2 years and there's critter evidence all over it. So to take one of these things apart, pretty simple. It's just a brush DC motor, so there's a couple of bolts in the end. The whole thing kind of comes apart. We're gonna do our best to kind of clean it up and see what we've got. See if we can't get the thing to turn. If we can get it to turn, then chances are we can clean up some of the armatures in there, and hopefully it just fires up and works. And if not, we're gonna buy a brand new starter for $37, because after I got it out, I looked, and that's what you can get a starter for a Ford Ranger for. So is this worth $37? Definitely not. Is it worth the fun of doing it? We'll find out. Stay tuned. As you saw, it's a very easy disassembly. It's the actual case body of the motor itself. This is the gear reduction assembly. So all of these things function as one piece, right? But the motor is what we're worried about. So from that loud banging noise, we know that the stator was actually firing out. I don't know if we can get the... Oh my God, there's so much crap in here. So the noise that we were hearing inside the car was actually the stator firing out, which makes like a clicking banging noise that you don't normally hear when the car's turning over. And yeah, I can't actually access it here to push it from the back. But that stator was actually banging against this bearing here, which is normal. So that's firing out. There's a solenoid in here that causes this to actually jump downwards. And then there's a gear drive assembly in here, which is where the motor assembly gets all of its torque from. So on the actual winding, you can see that there's some teeth gears here. They interface with the planetary gear set that's in here, and that gives you your high torque to actually turn the motor over for such a small, to turn the engine over for such a small motor. Now, to take this assembly apart, you've got an end cap and a bearing carrier, and that lives on the back side of this motor housing itself. And there's two screws. One screw holds the one set of screws holds the basically the electrification end of the motor onto the plate, and then the other two sets of screws hold the entire assembly together. Oh, there's a better look. This actually fell off when I was trying to not do that, but there's a better look at the whole planetary gear set that's in there that causes the starter to do the things that it does. So we know that the relay is good because when we were actuating the key, the relay was giving power to the motor to the point where it was firing the solenoid off. And what I found, and what I believe to be the cause of this motor not spinning, was a metric ton of oil and grease crap, along with just some you could see some actual wear on the actual, not necessarily on the windings themselves, but on the motor pack itself. So there's a bunch of, I can't tell if this is dielectric grease or if this is actual oil from penetrating inside the case of the motor. We absolutely have, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, if I can find it again. We've got a broken piece of magnet that was definitely in there. So that broken piece of magnet could have been jamming the entire winding. Looks like I can get that guy out. Yep, that's going out there. So we're gonna clean this off, basically just wipe everything down. I don't want to use a degreaser or anything like that because that can actually lead to increased corrosion. So we're gonna leave a little bit of oil in there. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's just what I'm gonna do. We're going to take some Scotch-Brite and literally just clean up the contacts on the motor itself. Because this is a brush DC motor, the brushes actually have to make physical contact with the motor itself to induce current into the motor and to get it to spin. So a little bit of Scotch-Brite, being careful to avoid the bearing surfaces. You don't want to mar the bearing surfaces with Scotch-Brite, but the motor windings themselves are fine, for lack of a better term. I mean, it's not really, but this is a free ranger. So we're gonna clean all this up. A little bit of shop rag, a little bit of Scotch-Brite. Nothing serious. We just want to make sure that there's no grease or anything on these windings when they go back together. I believe that I found the culprit. So why this bad boy wasn't spinning over. This is the actual brush assembly, and these guys that are sticking out are the brushes themselves, and you can see that they're sprung, right? So earlier when I talked about this, the springs hanging up, these springs actually have to make contact, or these brushes have to make contact with the winding assembly in order to induce the current. And this guy right here, it's I can't tell if it's stuck or if it's just out of brush or what it is, but it is not touching. And you can see the clear difference between, here's how much is left here. There's a pretty decent amount there. There's some there, but this guy is not coming out. So I'm gonna try and get it to pop out. I'm wondering if it's jammed or if that's actually all that's left of the brush. These brushes, I believe, are graphite, and they are designed to wear down. You can replace them for I think it's $26 for brushes and springs. But at that point, why would you? Because the entire starter is $37. So I'm gonna see if I can get this apart a little bit, get the cover off at least, which it looks like I can. Looks like it's just a little bit of a pry job there. There we go. And it looks like the brush is actually just hung up in there. So there's the spring, there's the brush itself. Why the brush is not extending? Oh no, that's severely worn. That's actually not extending because here's the actual winding. I know it's filthy. Here's the actual winding that makes contact with the brush that induces the current. And here you can see a perfect example of what it should look like. And here's a good example of what it should not look like. That is very worn down. So what we're gonna do at this point, we're gonna finish cleaning it up, we're gonna put it back together, and then we're gonna bench test it before we put it back in the truck. Bench testing is just hooking up 12-volt power and hitting the starter sense wire and seeing if it pops out and spins. If it does that, then we're gonna put it back in and send it. If it doesn't, then I'm gonna take one more look at brush assemblies and maybe we can replace these. If not, I'm just gonna order a new starter. So that's that. So we have this this starter motor all cleaned up, reassembled. I mean, went together pretty smoothly. Brushes made good contact. Tip that I forgot to include when you're reassembling: the brushes actually have an interference fit over. I'm pretty sure it's called the commutator on this. That rear bronze part of the motor pack itself, or the winding pack itself, and you actually have to pry them out of the way. When I reassembled it, they were all making good contact with that. So I'm expecting this to fire out and spin. So we're looking for two things here on this actual starter gear itself. We're looking for this to pop outwards, and then we're looking for it to spin. Now I'm using thin gauge wire for this because DC motors do not draw a lot of current when they're unloaded. And this is completely unloaded at this point. So all we're looking for is a very brief pop out and spin a couple of times. I have my very legit alligator clamps grounding the starter motor itself to the battery because to complete the circuit. So these motors actually ground through the engine block. So we're gonna see if we can get this bad boy to spin. All right, that's a no good. So as you can see, it's popping out, but it is not actuating. And it actually feels like we're fully engaged. Come on. Contact. All right, more clamps for more better. Okay, so the way the batteries work, or the way that starters work, I should say, is, we're gonna do this because that looks like it sucks too. So the way the starters work is you have a constant 12 volt that is supplied from the battery to one post. And this little terminal right here is called the starter sense wire, and this serves as a relay. So constant 12 volt hot, that's why it's super important to disconnect the battery before you pull a starter. Even if the car's off, there's still there's still a 12 volt hot that's coming here, and that's a lot of amperage. It's a very thick cable straight from the battery. Motherfucker. We got good contact with the battery. Okay. Let's throw our ground on. Okay, so in this configuration, we have constant 12 volts to the stud. I'm going to use my little jumper here to go onto the starter sense, and then we're going to tap this guy to the main power lug. Uses our 12 volt simulator 12 volt sense signal. Oh, look at that. Guess what? We fixed it. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that, I think this is a pretty safe assumption to make at this point, that piece of magnet, broken magnet that I had found inside the motor, there was some pretty good marring that was on that case pack, and I'm thinking that on the actual winding exterior, I'm thinking that tiny piece of winding was enough to jam up the motor itself. So since we cleaned that and all the grease out of it, we cleaned up the brushes, we cleaned up the contact surfaces, there's not much life left on that one brush. But the good news is that there's enough contact there that we should get plenty of mileage out of this thing before we inevitably have to put new brushes in it. So motor's good. It's gonna go back in a wheelie. We're gonna get her back up and running. Fast forward a few hours. It is now the evening. The starter is back in wheelie. I am fed. My hair is still a disaster, but you know, sometimes it just be like that. We're going to try and fire up now. I got the battery reconnected, just pop the hood down into first detemp position, and we're gonna see if our magic worked. If you're here and actually curious about how to R&R, remove and replace a starter on a 1996 3-liter 2-wheel drive 5-speed Ford Ranger, it is literally 3 bolts and 4 bolts and a push clip. So you have 3 half-inch head bolts that thread into the body of the starter itself. There's a shim that lives between the bell housing and transmission and the starter. and then you've got the main power lug on the back and the one push clip wire, and that's literally it to pull it out. The bolts are way longer than they need to be. To get to them, the easiest way that I found was to use like an 8-inch extension and a flex head ratchet, 3/8 ratchet, and then just put some oomph into it to get them to crack free. They went in a lot easier than they came out, mostly because the end of the bolts actually extend past the starter and can kind of gather some crap on them. Also, I figured out why the starter was covered in oil, and that's because whatever genius at Ford designed this thing in the 1990s after doing all those lines of Tylenol decided that we should put the oil filter right above the starter motor. Or let's put the starter motor on the same side as the oil filter. So literally every time you take off the oil filter, oil spills all over the starter, which is just... Sometimes I am just amazed. Anyways, let's see if it starts. Better. Oh. Neutral. Hey. Cool. Still runs like garbage, but it fires right up. Again? Oh yeah. So I'm pretty sure that cleaning those brushes was all that we had to do for now. I'm definitely gonna need to replace the starter at some point, but again, the idea behind this is get it on the road for cheap. So now we're gonna turn it around, do something fun. All right, so I have some good news and I have some okay news. The good news is that Willie made it all the way down my driveway. Kay turned all the way back up the driveway. No issues. The brakes are definitely soft. I'm pretty positive it's a booster issue at this point. Again, when the truck's off, I can get the pump up. I don't see any leaks underneath it. But the second that you add vacuum to that equation, I'm pretty sure the diaphragm seal internal to the booster has failed. Whatever. Made it about 3.5 feet short of the lift, and she stalled and did not want to restart. It smells like straight paint thinner, bad ethanol, crappy fuel in here. It's running filthy, filthy pig rich. I mean, it's a little bit hard to see now because I've had the doors open for probably 10 minutes and it's cleared out, but there is a nice kind of black, hazy fog in here. So not going to drive it a ton. I mean, not going to move it or run it a ton until we get that sorted, because I don't want to foul the cats or the O2 sensors or anything like that. So definitely going to have to address that vacuum leak issue, whether it is the booster or not. But the reason that I turned around and got on the lift, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves for kind of a good reason. I don't typically like to do this. I've got lift components in the mail. They're supposed to be here 3 days and 5 days, I think, should complete the whole lift. But we're going to get ahead of ourselves and we're going to mount the wheels and tires. And the reason for doing that is twofold. I need to check that my offset calculations are correct. And I'd rather do that on stock suspension without the lift involved, because it's easier to see against the body lines where those wheels and tires are going to sit. The other thing is, the tires that are on here, they have great tread on them. They're not dry rotted. For whatever reason, depending on which way they actually land when you park the vehicle, some of them hold air for 2 days, and some of them hold air for 2 weeks, and some of them flip-flop when you reverse the car like 4.5 inches. So because I am absolutely tired of putting air in the tires, we're going to swap those on and see what they look like. In order to do that, though, I talked about adapters, right? 5x4.5 to 5x5 adapters. And today, I got me a package from good old UPS. We have here some hub-centric, these are billet aluminum, 5x4.5 to 5x5 adapters. These look identical to pretty much every eBay adapter that's out there, right? They're billet aluminum, they still have the machine marks in them, they've been anodized black. The difference is these ones come with grade 10 studs pressed into them. And that's something that's super important that I can't stress enough. If you're gonna buy eBay stuff, a lot of that stuff is fine. Just make sure that you buy it with the appropriate markings on it. I mean, this is obviously an additional layer of potential failure between your the road and your vehicle. And you want these things to be tough, right? Billet aluminum is pretty hard to mess up. It's billet aluminum, right? you have to put some serious heat into aluminum to cause fissures or potential cracking, or have just a really bad batch of aluminum to really have to worry about these guys. It's the studs that are the primary source of failure on cheap wheel adapters. So the other thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you buy hub-centric wheel adapters. And you can see that here with the lip that's protruding here. These are 1.5 inches because I think that these are going to give us the right stance that we want. But you can see this additional lip that's protruding here. That makes balancing the wheel and tire substantially easier because you're adding basically 2 layers here for the wheel to secure to the axle. It definitely increases the level of difficulty of having a smooth ride going down the road. So that hub-centric aspect to it definitely plays a big part. So I'm gonna get the truck up in the air. I'm gonna get the wheels off. I'm gonna go over the hub-centric portion of that a little bit more. We're gonna slap the wheels and tires on and then see what it looks like. All right, we're currently at the point in the night where I start MFing everything. I'm sure that everyone who's watching this has heard that you're one broken bolt away from a 10-minute job turning into a 2-hour job. We don't have broken bolts. We have something worse. We have seized lug nuts and some other stuff, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. So the culprits here are whatever absolute asshole decided to put chrome caps over mild steel lug nuts. And this is a plague on American cars. Chrysler has this issue. Ford has this issue. I mean, I don't know. Chevy? No. Yeah, Chevy absolutely has this issue. The chrome caps suck. They fall apart. They get mangled. They come off separately. You got one that's a 17, one that's a 19. This is what it's supposed to look like, right? Nice, decent lug nut. Oh, look at that. Chrome cap came off. That one actually came off really easily. These two, not so much. So, I've already tried the put it on the ground, use a gigantic breaker bar, and almost shear the lug stud off method. This is not budging at all. There's one down here that's not budging as well, and I've absolutely destroyed the cap on that one. Also, the truck is currently sitting on its back rotor because that's just what happened when I put it down on the ground. So what I'm going to try and do is heat this up with a propane torch. The end cap, the end of this being exposed, combined with this being mild steel, has basically left a bunch of corrosion and crap in there that has seized the threads. So I'm hoping, really hoping, that by heating this up, I don't give a shit about the wheels. They're 14-inch aluminum alloys. I'm probably going to have to throw them on the side of the road to get rid of them. But I'm hoping that by heating up this lug nut, beating a socket on, I'm going to be able to twist it off. And hopefully we can be on our merry way. If not, I'm going to have a bad time. But it was free. So this is the kind of shit you get when you take on free projects. And I'm going to do this live so that everyone else can share in my misery. I don't even know if that's a good shot. Let's check the frame. Yeah, it's pretty decent. A little propane. Didn't even bother cleaning up the corrosion. Let's just burn it off. Oh yeah, spider webs. Let's get those nice fumes in there. So I'm going to try and heat up the stud and the lug nut evenly. And try and avoid putting too much heat into the wheels, but they're aluminum, so they should dissipate it fairly well because they're a large mass of aluminum. There are concerns with doing this about the heat treat on the studs themselves. Chances are the thread is going to be mangled anyways. I'm going to have to replace the stud. I just really don't want to have to try and cut these off. Particularly because I don't have an oxyacetylene torch. So it's going to be even bigger hell if I have to actually cut them off. I'm a little bit less concerned about this one coming off. I think this is going to come off because the chrome cap was there. The chrome cap just freaking splintered when I put the socket on it. So when you're heating these, the goal isn't to get them to be cherry red or anything like that. If you've gone cherry red, you're way too far. Way, way, way too hot. The goal is just to get enough heat into the stud itself to kind of expand and soften up whatever is binding everything. Try and put some heat in the base here, just in case there's anything that's actually galvanically corroded. The other downside to doing this is on a two-wheel drive hub with the grease cap right here. If you do put too much heat in there, then you have to be worried about ruining the quality of the grease. But a minute or two with the propane torch isn't going to kill anything. All right. We've got probably 45 seconds to a minute of working time before that big chunk of aluminum in the 50-degree temperatures completely dissipate the heat. So we're going to move with purpose. And it's on there. Can twist. Oh, we're moving and we are spinning on the stud, and that is very unfortunate because the entire lug nut has shifted. I love cars. Absolutely love them. Don't know what to do without them. Light of my life. Absolute light of my life. It's extremely important that when you do this, you use an impact socket. Because if you try and do this with a chrome one, not only are you going to absolutely destroy the chrome socket, but chrome sockets are way thinner walled and not meant to take this kind of rotational torque. Dear baby Jesus, dear 8-pound, 6-ounce baby Jesus, please come loose. Oh my Lanta. Oh yeah. Woo. All right. So the issue on this one actually was galvanic corrosion between steel lug nut, and this one's actually stainless steel. I don't know why this one's mild steel. But between the lug nut and the aluminum wheel and sitting for so long, so galvanic corrosion occurs when two different metals are touching each other. Happens all the time with iron and aluminum, iron and magnesium. It's not quite rust, it's corrosion, but it sucks to deal with. That's that mushroomed cap that I was talking about there. Remember I was talking about trying to keep heat off of the hub? Well, I did what any reasonable person would do when I couldn't get the other stud off, and I busted out the plasma cutter. And chop right through that shit. Because it's 2021, ain't nobody got time for that. Goggles are falling down on my face. Sweet Harbor Freight specs. Work excellent for plasma cutting work, by the way. Woo! We cooked her. That's for sure. And the cool part about plasma cutting, especially on aluminum, is that, well, most of that crap will probably just chip right off. Let's grab a nice set of channel locks. Got a nice set of channel locks here, right? This is the awesome part about plasma cutting. So, I mean, it makes life a little bit easier. Face of the wheel will probably never be the same, right? We could probably Scotch-Brite that wheel up, but again, who's gonna want 14-inch 5x4.5 wheels from 1996? Probably another Ranger enthusiast, I would guess. Both rears came off. The front, we have an interesting issue on the passenger side. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 that came off no issue. We have one that I had to pull the cap off because the cap was oh my god, peeled. I don't know if I'm gonna do, no, I'm not gonna be able to do that by hand. But the whole freaking stud is spinning in the hub. And because of that, I don't want to run the risk of actually stripping out where the stud goes into the hub by spinning this thing too much. So I'm just gonna wheel a plasma cutter over here and just chop this guy off as well. I gotta put 2 studs in it. It's like an extra $6 or something like that. And on these 2-wheel drive hubs, it's really easy to do. Pretty positive there's actually a recession in the back of them where you can actually sneak the stud in, and then we'll just draw them in normally. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this kind of shortly here. It's getting late, it's 11 and some change. But I wanted to finish this up real quick before I called it. We've got some more mediocre news out of Willie. The rear leaf springs have decided that the shackle mounts should be gone. So for as good of a shape as the frame is in, as everything else is in underneath, the oh, it's dark in there. Let's get some light. Oh. All right, a little flashlight. I swear I actually have nice tools. That's a story for another day. But, so shackle mounts are gone. They just rotted away. The frame rail is actually in really good shape. It's really solid. It's just all surface rust that's on here. There's like 2 spots in the interior where there's like a little bit of bubbling. But when I saw this, I immediately panicked because I thought, well, this thing's a rot box. It's, you know, it's going to be worthless. Why am I doing all this? It's not really, actually. It's just the thin stamped sheet metal shackle mounts that are gone. Both sides are gone. This guy is being held in right now by the poor struts and the front mounts, which are actually solid. So I was planning on replacing the shackles anyways with some adjustable shackles as part of the lift kit that I ordered. Now I'm just gonna have to add mounts to that. In the spirit of, don't know what that was. Weird metal sound hitting the ground. Always a little bit of panic, but in the spirit of doing this, you know, cost effectively, I was thinking about making some, and then I started looking, and they're actually pretty cheap to replace. And suspension geometry is not something that I really want to waste my time on, per se, on this build. I mean, Ford figured it out pretty good, and all the lift components are based on that stock geometry. So I'm probably going to order some replacement mounts. They're really easy to replace. I'll get over that when they get here. But the reason that I have not finished putting everything back together is I wanted to go over some of the points that I made earlier in the video. So I talked about hub-centric spacers and why they're important, right? And this is the last wheel that I have, right? Here's your spacer. This hub right here, this bore on the Ford is 64.5 millimeters or something like that. And what this does is it actually centers the wheel on the axle. So as you're going down the road and the axle's spinning around and around, the wheel, it doesn't really matter where it is rotationally in relation to the lug studs because it's always being kept center by the hub bore itself. Now, every manufacturer uses a different hub bore. Some manufacturers use multiple different hub bores depending on the size of the axle, the car, truck, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Jeep uses a 70.5 or 71.5 millimeter hub bore. I think it's 2 3/4, which I think is 71.5, which is what I got these manufactured to. The plus side is that when these are on and bolted up, we have this nice extension of the hub bore that the wheel sits on and is centered, you know, rotating down the road. The downside is, and you can see it there, is that these are not hub-centric to the Ford hub bore. So as a solution for that, I'm going to 3D print some spacer rings that are basically a 64.5 millimeter ID to a 71.5 OD that'll slip right on there and help us center that. But Tucker, what about lug-centric wheels? Lug-centric components suck. They're horrible. They rely on a conical taper of the lug nut to properly seat that wheel centered around the center line of the axle. It is a nightmare to get them on and balanced and rotating down the road without some sort of vibration that kind of comes and goes. It's really common with aftermarket wheels. It's why hub-centric rings are a thing. And I am not going to mess with them at all. I hate them. I hate lug-centric everything. Whoever decided that that was a good idea can suck it. Along with, he can actually, no, never mind. Chrome lug nut cap guy can suck it way worse. But whoever decided the lug-centric was a good idea can also suck it. So we run into a little bit of another issue with the rears on this. And when I ordered these as 1.5 inches because my backspacing calculations for the offset on the wheels and the amount of clearance that we had said that I should have 1.5 inches of spacing here. I checked the front lug studs to verify that they were less than 1.5 inches. And they are almost 1.5 inches exactly. What that means is that when the spacer goes on, you can't, let's see. When the spacer goes on, none of the spacer extends past the face of the, none of the lug stud itself extends past the face of the spacer, the adapter in this case. In the rears, just another head scratcher. It does. So you can see there, just a smidge, right? It's just 2 or 3 mil. And luckily for us, it's the non-threaded portion of the stud, but it just means it's a little bit more work. So what we're gonna have to do when I get to the point where I'm doing final assembly is just come through with the angle grinder and just nip off the very end of each one of these studs. It's not a big ask. It doesn't affect the performance of the wheel studs at all. It's just one more thing that we have to deal with. Alternatively, I could put like a 3 mil spacer behind these, but then I'm spacers on adapters and I don't like doubling down. So again, not proper torquing this, but it's pretty critical when you're using wheel adapters in particular, or bolt-on spacers, to appropriately torque everything. And it's also important to verify with whoever the manufacturer is of the adapters that you're torquing to their specifications along with the factory specifications. So it's simple, but it adds an extra layer of potential failure. So where you're actually bolting to the hub, you use the factory torque specs, which on this Ford I think is 96 foot-pounds if I remember correctly. And then for the adapter, they call out 85 foot-pounds for tight. And that has to do with the fact that we're going to billet aluminum. We're using grade 10 studs in there. We just want to make sure that this is all nicey nice, right? But because we're just aiming to roll this back and forth, we're not going to final torque everything and call it a day. So we drop this wheel on. Important to have good posture when you're lifting wheels. Can't tell you how many times with a heavier 10-ply truck wheel or something like that where I've just lifted the wrong way and then been miserable for a few days. So please be careful when you're dilly-dallying with vehicles. You know, form and technique. Everyone loves good technique. That one is not. I can't get it more than a third of the way onto the stud. Oh yeah, listen to that crispiness. And we're down. Never mind, they're big. Just didn't look like it because it was that full droop. Oh yeah. That is a huge, huge change to the look of Willie. We've already got substantially higher ride height. We've got way less space in the wheel wells. But in fitting with the Prerunner theme, when we add probably 5.5 inches of lift that we're gonna get out of the lift kit that I ordered, it should sit at the perfect height. I mean, it's actually gonna be pretty tall. Well, 5.5 inches of lift. I'm digging it. That's my forehead. Yeah, not crazy about the aesthetics of the tire. It definitely look better with like some ATs or some MTs on it. But again, $75 wheels and tires. So next episode of this is going to be tackling the suspension issues. You know what? We should actually see if it's going to fire up. Let's see. What do we think? Just clearing out. Just clearing out. Woo! I have to get some fresh gas in this bad boy. And then I'm going to order some more parts. We'll get this thing cleaned up. We'll return to full-time Datsun content. So I know I just uploaded a couple of videos and I've got some more questions about what's going on with the Datsun. I have filmed stuff for it. Some of the stuff that I filmed for it, I mentioned in the last video that I changed my mind on some of it. So some of that I'm not going to post. I'm still working on getting some stuff done for it. So I appreciate you guys tuning in for stuff that you didn't sign up for. I know I lured you all in with the Datsun and now I'm throwing 1996 Ford Rangers at you. But and if you're here for the 1996 Ford Ranger, then check out the Datsun. It's getting a big V8 and, well, it's actually a mediocre V8 by American standards. But yeah, so as always, appreciate you tuning in. Willie says thanks, too. Man, this thing looks... That totally changed the entire attitude of this truck. Kind of bringing a tear to my eye. Not really. That's just the poorly burnt gasoline and ethanol mixture. Sweet.